I don't know deterrence is really the right model. I think we're really into compellence, which is the other side of deterrence. So deterrence is, please don't do this. And I will either deny your attack objectives or I'll retaliate in some way to deter you. The problem is what we really want is to compel people to follow common laws and trade. We want them to follow the terms of WTO. We want people to follow rules of anti-corruption procedures. We want the Chinese and Russians largely to follow norms that have been created for how market economies deal with each other. And so how do you get someone to obey the law? And maybe deterrence is possible here. Maybe I should revisit that. But that we can certainly retaliate for non-market control-oriented practices, things that are harmful. But it's not clear that the Chinese are really going to care on any retaliation we might do. We can try to deny them from succeeding, and that means providing alternatives to countries that are faced with it, provide ways for them to escape or get out of it if they've made bad judgments. But longer term, it's compellence. It's, follow the rules of the rest of the world and don't consider yourself special or exempt because you're Chinese or whatever it is, or because you're American. That is, certain universal norms that you ought to follow. And I think that's at the core, really the big problem with China is that it sees things as a hierarchy. There's the central kingdom, there's everybody else. So it's not, all countries are equal to each other. Well, the Chinese don't believe that. They believe there's a hierarchy. There's, mandate of heaven, there's an emperor, and being harmonious is when everyone knows their proper place. It's when people get out of their proper place that there is disharmony. And, I think that is a fundamentally different way of looking at the world, but they have these ideas of sphere of influence, like the Russians, but in a way that's much more hierarchical than even the Russians. Everybody is in relationship to them, whereas Russia just wants to have its own sphere of influence, however brutally enforced, and in a multipolar world, and doesn't like to see dominance by the US or the West. But they don't have this idea that they're necessarily in a hierarchy and that the Slavs are the top of the hierarchy and everybody else has to put themselves in a relationship to that. The Chinese do. They ideologically, politically, and what they're doing now has a sense of exceptionalism, that the rules don't apply to them. And so they have to be compelled until they decide to reform their ways. And until they reform their ways, we have to act with extreme caution and understand what we're getting into, diversify away from them. It's like having a bad neighbor in the neighborhood. You just got to deal with it because they're not like you. They don't follow the same rules.
Is more important is what we can do for the allies in the developing countries. I mean, the new spacefaring nations tend to rely on China and Russia more. Japan, US, or Europe are pretty much independent from China and the Russian space capabilities, and therefore we are much more resilient to such threats. But I think the new spacefaring nations are more vulnerable. So I think what we can do is to provide alternative. Japan provided opportunities to collaborate with countries in Indo-Pacific through the APRSAF, the Asia-Pacific Space Agency Regional Forum. I think the APRSAF provide a very strong alternative to the APUSCO, and the APRSAF is a sort of a forum to discuss about this possibility of using space and developing space capabilities, how to build a small satellite or how to collaborate with the other research institutions.
We are still in the deliberation stage. We have not really moved beyond very initial stages of deliberation. I'm not even saying that we have had serious conversations on this, but I think we are getting somewhere very serious now. Of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, China's aggressive behavior in the Indo-Pacific throughout the last 2 years in the middle of the pandemic. And one of the things is possibly a return of the technology export control regimes that were very popular, that were quite effective during the Cold War years. So I would think that there will be a return to the possibilities of this technology spread to a very large number of countries who are not like-minded, like the Indo-Pacific major powers or Europe and so on and so forth. But I think there are going to be problems on that front. It's not going to be as easy as we have done in the past during the Cold War. Today, space technology has spread to a very large number of countries. So again, how do you stem the further proliferation? There are already certain steps taken by the US, for instance. The number of the kind of Chinese students who come into US universities, high-tech programs and kind of things, and the kind of benefit that they get. So high-end science and technology domains, I think the US has already started placing limitations in terms of the Chinese students who can access, who can be part of the universities in the United States. So I think such measures are going to be taken up by a number of advanced countries who have advanced space capabilities, and these kind of advanced space programs